Good evening. My name is Nikita Hall, and this is my informative speech for Communications 101. Please meet my audience. April Sansbury, Walter Sansbury, and Edward Gay. Well, let's get started. Diabetes. We all have heard of it. Most of us know someone who has it. In fact, the American Diabetes Association reports that 23.6 million children and adults in the U.S. have the disease, and an alarming 5.7 million of them don't even know it. Diabetes is a disease that, if not controlled, it affects the livelihood and the life of those affected by it. Up until 1921, a child diagnosed with the disease wasn't expected to live beyond 1 year. Thankfully, medical science and breakthrough technologies are happening every day, and we're coming closer to a cure. But until then, modern treatment and management tools have improved both the quality and length of life for diabetics. You see, this hits very close to home for me. In 2002, my 5-year-old son was diagnosed with diabetes, and I can remember sitting in the emergency room weeping as the doctor gave me the diagnosis that I had already suspected. My fear was that my son wouldn't have the opportunities and experiences that other children would have, that he wouldn't be able to grow up like other little boys. But now I'm grateful. Not that my son has diabetes, but that we're in this point in history. At a time in history when medical advances allow my son to be normal in most ways. In the next few minutes, we'll take a brief look at the evolution of diabetes management, current technologies that allow diabetics to effectively manage their disease, and a few diabetics who have not let it define or hinder them from achieving great success in their lives. Diabetes treatment and management has evolved over the past 2,000 years to what we see today. In the 1st century, it was named diabetes by a Greek man named Aretaeus. And this disease was described by the severe thirst and frequent urination that accompanied it. In fact, the word diabetes is from the Greek word that means siphon. At the time, there were no effective methods of treatment for the disease, but what was recommended to diabetics to consume were oil of roses, dates, raw quinces, and gruel, which is a type of porridge. In the 17th century still, there lacked an effective method of treatment or diagnosis. However, a London doctor by the name of Thomas Willis, was able to diagnose his patients with diabetes by tasting their urine to determine if it was sweet. Ugh. Thus the term diabetes mellitus, which means honeyed. Surprisingly, this method was used up until the 20th century. During the 19th century, the connection between diabetes and the pancreas was made. It was observed that patients who died of diabetes often had damaged pancreases. In 1869, Paul Langerhans, a German medical student, discovered cells within the pancreas that would later be known as the insulin-producing beta cells in the pancreas. Later, 20 years later, a team of German researchers actually removed the pancreas from a dog. And what happened to the dog? The dog developed diabetes. This led to the identification that one of the purposes of the pancreas is to produce a substance that regulates sugar glucose in the blood. Now, if only that substance could be isolated. Then in 1921, an exciting discovery took place. A surgeon by the name of Frederick Banting and his assistant Charles Best were conducting experiments using canine pancreas extract. It's a mouthful. Giving a diabetic dog injections allowed them to keep that diabetic dog alive for 70 days. More tests were needed, but they required a larger supply of the substance. So they began using cattle pancreas substances. Later, with the help of biochemist Bertram Collip, they were able to develop a more refined extract, something more purified that they could actually use on humans. And the first person to receive insulin injections was a young man by the name of Leonard Thompson. He was a 14-year-old who was dying of a dangerously high blood glucose level. Within 24 hours, his blood glucose was brought into normal range. Remember, the life expectancy of a child diagnosed with diabetes was only 1 year. So imagine how excited his parents must have been. Well, the lives of diabetics after that would never be the same. By 1923, the company Eli Lilly and Company was producing insulin in commercial quantities. In fact, it was enough to supply to the entire North American continent. The discovery of insulin preceded other medical breakthroughs that aid in diabetes management. In 1961, Becton Dickinson discovered or developed a single-use syringe. Up until that time, syringes had to be boiled and sterilized, and needles actually had to be sharpened with a grindstone. Now, diabetics are able to take the needed dosage of insulin and dispose of their syringe. In 1969, the first portable glucose meter was created. Prior to its creation, diabetics used urine kits to test their urine. They would have a test tube with a drop of Benedict's solution and urine and put it in a pot of boiling water and determine by the color change whether or not they had high blood sugar. In 1969, the glucose meters were big and bulky, weighing in at approximately 3 pounds. Today, glucose meters are small enough to fit into a pocket or purse. In the late 1970s, insulin pumps were created. Though big and bulky, it was meant to replicate the system that the pancreas uses to infuse insulin into the diabetic system. Basically, it's a microcomputer that replicates the function of the pancreas. One of its advantages is to increase blood sugar control and reducing the risk of complications associated with diabetes. Today, the insulin pump is small enough to fit into a pocket or a belt clip. Medical advances and discovery have allowed diabetics to live fulfilled lives, hindering them from nothing that they choose to achieve. Some famous people with diabetes included Arthur Ashe, famous tennis player, Sean Busby, champion snowboarder, Halle Berry, actress, Nicole Johnson, Miss America 1999, and many others. We've come a long way from using porridge to treat diabetes. Though serious, the threat of death is no longer imminent. Because of today's advances, the sky is the limit for diabetics. Like the rest of us, their only obstacle to succeed is themselves. That 5-year-old son I told you about is now 14. He has a long life ahead of him, one that will be filled with great successes and maybe change the world, all because he can now control his blood sugars. Thank you.